Hey guys, if you're joining us here, we are doing a very special kind of segment here on Media Essential Workers, just trying to deal with everything that's going on in the world right now. We're going to be joined by quite a few people. We have Jeremy Ross from CBS2, who's going to be joining us. He's been doing a lot of the coverage so far. We have John Rizzo, who's the business agent for IBEW. He'll also be joining us, but we're also very excited to have a few people who are in the security industry. Bob Lazo, many of you know him. We've utilized him exclusively and extensively at NBC. So we're going to have them all kind of join the conversation with us. I'm going to start by, well, actually, you know what? Let's punch everybody up. Make it a free roll. So guys, we'll start with you, Jeremy, then John, and then the dynamic duo over here. Kind of introduce yourselves and talk about what we're doing here today.
I guess I'll start out first. My name is Jeremy Ross, and I'm a reporter from CBS2. And over Saturday and Sunday, I've been covering a lot of the protests and unrest, and those two, I should point out, are very different from one another, and do not, from what I have seen, included the same people from Group A to Group B. And that said, we've seen a lot of looting. We have seen fires. And on one occasion, I have crew members who insist that they also saw people with guns firing them at store windows. And I can get into that a little bit later. You can be assured we immediately left and went to safety when that occurred. But that's kind of a summary of some of the things that I've seen over the weekend. And I'm glad that we are talking about safety given some of the observations.
All right. John, we're going to get to you. And just real quick for all our viewers watching, if you want to chime in, ask questions, you're more than welcome to do so. If you post something in the comments, we'll be able to get it and kind of address it. John, tell us a little about what you do. I'm with NABET. I'm the vice president of NABET Local 41, representing people at certain stations. I know you represent the guys at the other stations. Tell us who you represent and what you've been dealing with.
Well, as you stated earlier, I'm the business manager of the IBW Local here in Chicago. We represent locally in town CBS, WTTW, WGN Television, WYCC, and I'm sorry, WCIU. YCC is no longer with us, unfortunately, and you know, several other radio stations and whatnot. So along with a huge freelance population. So you and I, Raza, have been texting pictures to each other, and both the stations that we represent of vehicles being spray painted and broken into, and property being stolen and that sort of thing. We have clips of my folks at WGN being harassed in a crowd and having to leave their vehicles, and we've seen footage of that. So right now, I'm just listening and learning and seeing what your folks recommend. We're in close contact with our stewards at these stations, trying to keep our people safe. The news directors trying to keep our people safe. So it's an evolving thing. Plus, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we have that as well to consider. It's not just guns and sticks and rocks. It's a small, tiny virus that you can't stop. So we want to keep everybody safe, and I'm here to listen and learn and hopefully bring something back and keep our folks safe.
Very good. And one of the things that I think it's very important to address, like you said, we're still in the climate where we're dealing with the virus. There's a lot of unknowns out there. We were told for the last couple of months to socially distance, to make sure that we are not in a position where we're exposing other people to this. And then within a matter of a couple of days, we're thrown into another situation where, Jeremy, you know this, as well as Usher will be joining us shortly. We were initially told to stay in different vehicles altogether just because we wanted to make sure we had that social distance. And now in a situation where we're covering protests, we are riding along with security reporters. We're trying to find that good balance between everything. And speaking about the protests, that's something that our two security consultants know a lot about. So I'm gonna leave it to you to introduce yourself and talk about. Let's first talk about how you got into this industry, what your relationships were with the television stations, and then get into what we're dealing with now particularly. Bob, let's start with you. And actually, Bob,
Yeah.
let's start with you again. It looks like your mic was muted. Let's.
Oh, okay. All right. No, I spent 33 years with the Chicago Police Department, and I started out doing security for, believe it or not, Jenny Jones about 20 years ago. And one of the general managers from NBC asked me if I did side work, and I said, yeah. So in 2001, I started doing the marathon, the Chicago Marathon. And we did security for them, and we're still doing it to this day. And that's how I got started, actually, with NBC, just by the general manager asking me, do you do security? And my wife, Barbara, she has been with me ever since. We've both been doing security and consulting for NBC.
So I think one of the things that has been a challenge, I know when I spoke to some of the security, is just getting around, just meeting up with some of your crews was logistically a challenge. It seems like in general, I'm hearing this from various TV stations, still a problem sometimes to get security out to the crews. Has this been something that's always been an issue? Is there more complexities with what's going on now?
No, we've been doing pretty good as far as coming into the tower and meeting the crews, or we'll meet them off-site somewhere where they'll give us an address. And this is the first time we've been using our own personal cars to meet the crews to keep them safe.
Okay. Let's go over a little about the experiences. I know Sarah, my wife, is producing with us. She's off camera. I kind of want to talk about some of the different dynamics of covering this protest as opposed to other things, again, because there's a pandemic. Sarah, if you got some of those pictures that you can pop up showing what the scenes are like in Chicago, I'd like to make sure that our viewers also get an opportunity to see, like, as with most protests, we're often we have to cover the whole picture. We have to be objective, make sure everyone's voice is out there. But I mean, for instance, here's we're sometimes caught between protesters more often, not more often, but as often. Sorry, if you could put the other picture up there. We've also seen shots in this situation where sometimes it appears, at least, that we're being in the line of fire of police, like with these rubber bullets. And what was very particularly kind of astonishing in how egregious it was, Sarah, if you got that video, if you can play, one of our crews, as a matter of fact, was relieved of their cameras. And then I don't know if they were the perpetrators. I don't know if there was someone who happened to then get custody of these cameras, posted video on social media. Sarah, if you play that out for us. And essentially looks like we can't get audio here, but they narrate that they have a camera and that it's now up for sale or auction. So I believe that there may have even been security at this. So let's talk about that, Bob. If you could kind of tell us about some of the challenges that are faced in situations like this, and how you guys are able to deal with this.
Yeah, that happened when the crew was on 75th Street. I think it was 405 75th Street. Anyway, they were there supposedly going to take a shot of a cleanup area. That's what they were told. So we went out there in 3 cars, the camera guy, the reporter, and the security officer. They were told, if you don't clear, we're going to vandalize your car, so you better get out of here. So the reporter, female reporter, got in her car, security officer got in his car, blocked the road. The camera guy was putting his gear away, hit the button for the tailgate to go down. He was walking to the driver's side. Within those few seconds, this young guy ran up, took his camera, and took off. That's how that happened. They were told to get out of the area or their cars will be damaged. So they heeded that warning.
So one of the things I'm realizing is that this is a very quickly and fluidly, rapidly changing situation. It doesn't even matter if police necessarily are there or security. These things can quickly change, almost maybe at the blink of an eye. Jeremy, I was watching some of your coverage. Maybe you could talk to us something about what you've witnessed as well.
And in terms of changing in a blink of an eye is exactly the right way to describe it. I will first immediately say that CBS2 has done a really good job of monitoring our safety and security. They have considered using professional security. They have also made sure that we are in groups of at minimum 3, so that there's someone who can watch our backs when we are broadcasting with a photojournalist and another reporter. I was actually on Sunday, one of two reporters to help out in that situation. But to your point about things changing in a blink of an eye, we were covering a very peaceful protest in Hyde Park. And we got back to our vehicle, which was in an empty commercial lot with a store or two that was closed down. And they had bars on the front, kind of like garage door, for lack of a better word, that was down and secure. And myself, a photojournalist and a reporter, were calling in just to find out where we had to go next. And during that 3-minute call, it went from peace and quiet in a parking lot to more than a dozen people showing up and breaking into a store right behind our car. And, it was all of a sudden, this was no longer a safe place for us to be. So like any station in and around Chicago, when we felt that we were not in a safe place, we got out of there quick. And that was in only a matter of maybe a minute or two. We got out of there. We, of course, called the police. And, it was a scary situation. You had people breaking into a highly secured business, stealing whatever they could find. It was actually a beauty shop. And there is video somewhere on that. In addition, we were off of Michigan Avenue and near the river. And, we saw from about 80 or 90 yards away, a very safe distance away, some people that were starting to bash in a window. So a photojournalist and I, as well as another photojournalist, again, a team of three, were filming behind cover, watching things develop. We felt safe, and all of a sudden, one of the crew members believed that one of the looters took out a gun and started shooting at the window. Basically, as soon as we heard that, per station policy, and it's the policy of many stations around Chicago, we get out of there. And we headed right to an area with lines of police officers, told them about the situation, and got to safety. So it can change in a heartbeat. And, I'll also add that in the city of Chicago, crime can happen anywhere. But over the last weekend and over the last few days, that has intensified, and it has become more of a scary situation.
Bob, we were talking earlier, and you had mentioned that as security, when a situation's rapidly changing like that, always listen to security. Kind of tell me about that. What has your experience been in situations like this? And what do you use? I'm sure you have an awareness of the situation everywhere. And just to kind of remind people and tell people who aren't familiar with this, when the photographer's shooting, they're kind of blind. They have a big blind spot to everything going here. There's that concept of tunnel vision. Even the reporter who, they're looking and they're very focused on what it is they're doing. What's the job of security here? And what do you do to make sure that everyone, yourself included, is safe as we go forward?
Well, usually I have kind of a code word form when we want to get out of there. The one I use a lot is I have my cell phone with me, and I'll tell the reporter, the camera guy, hey, we got a call here. We have to get out of here now because you have to get out. In other words, get in a safe passage there. That's my code. I'll tell them you got a phone call, end your segment, and that's it. And that's the way we back out real nice and get out of there. And they don't know, the people around us don't know what's going on. This way we can get out of there without disturbing anything. And we're in safe place to get out. That's the way I handle it.
I think that's a great idea, and just the aspect of doing it without creating a sort of maybe a scene or a commotion, but doing it as smooth as possible kind of raises me or makes me wonder. I've often told people, you know what, if you don't need to use lights, don't go blasting your lights on, commanding attention. Is that something you have an opinion on after having done this for a while? And just what are some recommendations that you give your crew? You get in the car with somebody, you guys are headed. What are you telling them?
Just to be careful, and we try and find out what location we're going to, because like I said, we were giving bad information as far as that when the camera was taken, it was supposed to be just a cleanup area shot. There were over 100 people there when they told us, or told the guys there, get out of there, we're going to vandalize your cars. So much for being a safe spot to go film. So you have to learn to get better intelligence from who's ever calling into the station or I don't know who does the location shots for the guys to go out there. They've got get better information for your journalists, your camera guys, because you don't want to go into some situation that you're going to be really surprised what the hell's going on. You don't want that surprise.
If I might add something to that.
Absolutely, Barbara.
Jeremy, you seem like you know what's going on, and that's part of it, is being aware as the journalist, knowing what's going on, knowing when to leave. Actually staying on the fringes of the protest would be a safer place than being in the center of it, trying to get a shot that way, and just backing off when you need to.
And I'm going to add this, and I appreciate that, because that's just part of general awareness, having your head on a swivel, which I know a lot of security folks will constantly say that that's really important.
Right.
And I think that more and more newsrooms are starting to realize that while they want us to be, tweeting and making sure that we're posting on social media, during situations like that, it is not time to be on the phone. It is time to have your eyes up, looking wherever possible. And for some of the younger reporters that I'm working with, I've had to, I've had to pull them aside and say, look, your boss is going to be okay if you're not posting, because you have to have situational awareness. If your concentration is on your phone, you're not looking at the crowd around you. And that's something that people need to really take more seriously in the situation.
Right.
If I may add, one of our biggest problems seems to be, and Lazo, you've probably run into this from time to time, is we have much smaller crews. Due to budget cutbacks, we used to have 2 technicians that would be on site, a photog and a possible audio person, as well as the reporter and sometimes a producer. But the more bodies you have, the more eyes you have in the street. Now, they might not be effective at stopping an entire mob, but at least they have enough eyes. When you're a sole camera person, you have one eyeball. That's it. The other is taken up by a camera, and you cannot see out of this side of your face. Now, about 10 days ago, one of our reporters at WGN Gaynor Hall, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but somebody ran out from the middle of nowhere from a blind spot from a cameraman who couldn't stop it, grabbed her and shouted profanities, and then zipped off. And this was right before the protests had started. So there has been a big demand for additional crew people to kind of keep their head on the swivel, so that the reporters can do their job and be safe. And the technicians are being used as the front line. And unfortunately, companies for the past few years have been saying, well, it's your job if you don't feel safe to get out. And you folks are right. I mean, you have to get more information to that desk from that desk and not be assigned, by the assignment desk into some dangerous situations. Now, like we were just talking about, where a situation turned within 3 minutes to all of a sudden, oh my gosh, here it's right here on our doorstep. We're watching this looting happening, and there was nobody here a second ago. Those are the types of things. It's like, hurry up, where's our exit plan? How do we get out of here? Now, we've dealt with that in the past with NATO, the G8 summit and those types of things, bulletproof vests, helmets, gas masks, rooms rented above the fray, to get shots of streets and things like that. This is one of those instances, and albeit it's dying down now, but we need to be aware in the future when these things spring up, stations need to be ready to protect their people.
If you're just joining us right now, and thank you for that, John, I think that's a very apt point, that we just don't have the bodies out there like we used to. We need to make sure that there are enough people to be just situationally aware of everything going on around us, because the big thing is we got to have people who are looking out for each other in the field like that. If you're just joining us now, it's myself, Raza Siddiqui, Vice President of NABET 41, Jeremy Ross. We have John Rizzo, Business Agent of IBW, Bob Lazo, Barbara. Give us the name of your security company one more time.
Security Consultants.
That's easy enough to remember. Security Consultants. They've been working quite a bit with NBC, and I'm seeing a waiting room here, someone that, speaking of NBC, a lot of NBC people are familiar with, and that's Usher Qureshi. Going to pop him up right now. Usher, how are you doing, man? You got the background, everything going?
I'm good. I've just been listening to the discussion, and one of the interesting things that we sometimes hear, especially on the local side, that was touched upon, is this idea that you shouldn't be in a situation where it could get dangerous, right? One of the things I heard from management at one point at one of the places I worked was that if you need a helmet or you need a gas mask, you shouldn't be doing anything. You should be gone, basically. And that's all well and good in practice, but as you guys all know, over the last few weeks, with we don't look for this kind of trouble, right? You try and find a good vantage point where you can get the images that are necessary to relay that to the audiences. In my situation, we had a very, very safe situation a couple years ago when I was in Ferguson, and you look this up. This is one of the big ones that happened in that first week in Ferguson. Was we were set up outside, about a mile and a half from where the epicenter of these protests were happening, because there was a perimeter, there was a lockdown, so we couldn't get in there, and we didn't have any interest to go there at that point because we had choppers up and we were basically away from the action. But we were going to do a live interview with the guests, and obviously if you're going to interview somebody, you're going to find a very safe place to do that in. And we did that in a neighborhood adjacent to the main strip, but still a mile away. We couldn't even hear what was going on in the protest. That's how far away we were. And part of why we set up there was because there were police squad cars that had blocked off access to that street. And so there was still a background, and you could tell, okay, this is as far as we could get. This is as close as we could get to the action without being in the midst of it to do this interview. And what ended up happening to us was, our backs were to that intersection. We had an escape route in front of us, but shortly afterwards, those two squad cars took off, and an MRAP rolled up along, adjacent, parallel to where we were. And without warning, rubber bullets, tear gas, all shot in our direction, even though we had cameras, lights set up. Very easy to see that we were a crew, nothing going on around us, no protesters, no looting, no rioters, none of that. So, you never can tell where that danger is going to come from. We had no anticipation that in a quiet neighborhood adjacent to where there were some protests that we would be, targeted in that way. And so, we didn't have gas masks at the ready because we had no reason to have them at the ready. And so, we just had to take off with a lung full of tear gas. So, again, these things are so unpredictable. And as much as you plan, escape routes and making sure that you have exit strategies and meeting points and all those things and how hot it's going to get before you get out, it's so unpredictable. It's so volatile. And, those orders come so quickly to disperse crowds, and the media gets caught up in that, and you become part of it. So, again, when you're covering this, you should always be prepared for the idea that it's going to escalate very quickly, and, think of the best way to get out of there if you can.
Jeremy, anything you'd like to add to that? And just to let the viewers know too, if you see me looking down at the phone, it's not me trying to be rude. It's I'm taking questions from some of our colleagues at the other stations who are giving me kind of ideas to ask. Jeremy, if you have anything you want to weigh in with this or add to this, I would love to hear that as well.
I think that's the perfect example of you hedge your bet. You hedge your bets when it comes to setting up for these sorts of things. Fortunately, compared to 5 or 10 years ago, we have the kind of technology that allows us a little bit more escapability. We're not tethered as much to those huge live trucks where if you have to all of a sudden escape to safety, well, it's going to take 20 minutes for us to lower the mast and that sort of thing, because we now have, of course, basically internet-based backpacks that allow us to go live. So there is the ability to get out of there in a hurry. It's obviously not preferred, but that is a little bit more on our side. As I was saying earlier, we were in the safety of a parking lot with no one around, and within a few minutes, all of a sudden we have more than a dozen people looting the store behind us, and that got dangerous real quick. We all got out. We got to a safe place and called 911. So we did our best to get to an area where we said, hey, there's no activity here. We can hang on. We can call the newsroom. It's a safe place. But you have to expect the unexpected, and certainly that has happened throughout the weekend.
Well, fantastic.
And Jeremy, one of the things I was really wondering was about, is you brought a really good point up, is the fact that we are so mobile, right? And that makes it easier to escape, but it also makes it tempting because you can get closer. It's easier to get closer. It's easier to get, access to those really incredible images and bring the viewer right in the middle of the action. It's so much easier. And I think for a lot of folks, that's a dangerous temptation because, just as easily as you can get out of there, being that close, you can get enveloped by the situation very quickly as well.
The ongoing rule that I have with my crew is if one member says, I don't feel good, we're done. And so lately we've been going out with a crew of 3. If we have a minority of 1, we're out. If we all feel safe, we will continue. So it's a gut feeling. And quite frankly, we have pretty good guts. And, when you've done this long enough, you have an idea of when things could get hot. You position yourself in the best place possible. But if someone is uncomfortable, you have to trust that person and get out of the situation.
Let me ask you this. Usher, Jeremy, you both talked about position, about scouting, where you think you'd be the safest. What are some of the factors that you make in deciding this? Like, obviously, from what we've seen, between police, between protesters, you never know where you're going to get that next interaction from. So where do you position yourself? Do you believe where you're safe? And then I'm going to ask our security consultants where they advise as well. So let's start with you, Usher, Jeremy, and go that way.
Well, one of the things that we hope for is before we go into these situations is to have, very open communication and dialogue with the authorities, with law enforcement. If it's organized, if it's staged correctly, then you should know what the best spots are for you, where you can go, where you can't go. We're seeing a lot, just watching, CNN the other night, the interaction between a live reporter and a police officer who was just telling him as he was live and he was walking, you need to keep walking. And he just kept telling him to keep walking. He says, where do I need to walk to? He was looking for that direction. How far should I go? Where do you need me to be? And we're not finding that direction. You could see in that live shot, the officer was just saying, just keep going. Just keep going. Well, where do I stop? At some point, we have to stop, right? So, good communication between law enforcement and the media and journalists is so important. And I'll be honest with you, what are we at? 2020, right? 6 years ago, the first half of the week from Ferguson, was very difficult, very challenging. Once the Missouri State Patrol came in, they were much more organized about things. We knew where staging grounds were. We knew which areas were going to be perimetered off and locked down, essentially, what time they were going to be locked down, where everybody was going to be. So we had a better sense of how they were going to control these crowds. Again, that's basically what is supposed to be happening, is crowd control. When it gets to the point where it becomes sort of militarized in its response, then that's when you start to see sort of a more volatile escalation. You see that sort of posturing that's more warlike rather than crowd control like, and that's when you see tensions rise, and that's when you can sort of feel the electricity and the hair on the back of your neck go up, indicating that something's about to happen, something's going to go wrong, and you need to find a way out. But again, I think communication ahead of time, if possible. But I feel like these days you look at what's going on in these cities across the country, and there's very little communication prior to these incidents getting out of hand, where you see the media getting caught up in the melee, essentially.
Well, if you look at what happened with that CNN a few days ago, they were told a position to be in. They were told that, you're okay here. But again, there was a situation now, whether they were talked to by local police or state police, we do know they were later detained by state police. And again, that's one of those situations where it just seems like maybe communication wasn't there. Maybe the situation had changed. But it makes you think, what about that led law enforcement maybe to think they were a threat? But more than that, what could they have done to be more proactively maybe out of a situation where they were put in that? But again, these are rapidly changing. So Jeremy, I'm going to ask you about your kind of I mean, gosh, you were marching with protesters, you were interacting with police. Was it Sunday that I saw? Tell me what you saw. Weighing in on what Usher said.
Yeah, and what Usher was talking about in terms of Ferguson, and I was not there, but what I heard from friends was you had generalized points where people would gather. And those scenes became familiar over many days. And when police came in, there was an understanding of generally where you could be, where you couldn't be, because you had a sort of a stationary general area. Whereas what we're seeing now, it's happening on South Side, the center of the city and the Loop, the West Side, some of the suburbs now.
Yeah, that's one of the things that caught me up there. It's a totally evolving, different kind of dynamic than what we've seen.
And that can make for a lot of trouble, because you're not necessarily dealing with one mouthpiece from this law enforcement or that law enforcement, and so the playing field can change, and so that makes everyone's job hard, including law enforcement, especially for law enforcement. You'd mentioned about the protests that I was at and covering folks who were peacefully marching. I will tell you that a lot of what goes into a reporter's decision to be where they are at the time is the temperature of the crowd. And I will tell you that when you saw me in the crowd, we had determined, and it was not just me, it was a photojournalist as well as another reporter, that these folks are peaceful and they are marching with purpose, and they're exercising their First Amendment rights, and they're not looking to break stuff and hurt people. And in fact, we saw examples of someone who was on the sidewalk threw a water bottle at a line of police. And those protesters who we were covering ran over to that person and said, "You got to shut that down." So we felt comfortable in that crowd. That said, when it got to the end of the protest in one particular intersection, people began to disperse. And then all of a sudden there was a little bit of an argument or conflict with officers in a squad car. And within a matter of about 2 to 3 minutes, bam, all of a sudden you have secondary law enforcement summoned. Things got tense. They had to form a police line. And all of a sudden we had a lot of pushing and shoving. And it got volatile enough that my producer said, "I don't like what I'm seeing. You guys are out." And you know what? Within a few minutes, we got out. And so it just kind of goes to show you that, like we were talking about, what is peaceful, what our gut tells us is totally fine to be in and cover and report the news, can turn in a quick hurry.
That makes perfect sense. Barbara, Bob, I'm going to ask you, when you come with the crews and kind of determine where they should be setting up, where a location is, what are some of the things you're looking for? You were both in law enforcement careers. Obviously, you're probably able to read not only the body language, but you have the relationships with law enforcement to know, hey, guys, where do you think is good? Tell me some of the things that you look for in making those determinations.
Well, if there's police on the scene, at least we can talk to them and let them know, hey, we're here to do some shots here. Let us know where you want us. Or if we need you, I'm going to wave to you that we're going to need some help, or we're going to get the heck out of there. But the thing is, your security person has to make the call for the journalist and your camera guy. If he doesn't feel comfortable for you guys being there, you have to listen to him and get out of there. Because, I know a lot of the guys, they want to get that extra shot. The journalist wants to get that extra interview, and he doesn't realize that things around him are kind of getting bad. So that's why I always say, hey, we got to get out of here, or I'm using the cell phone thing. We got a call. Let's get out of here. But I'd like to see if there's police on the scene, introduce ourselves. We're here to do some taping. Where do you want us? That's the main thing. We have to feel secure and make sure that our people, the news guy, your photographer, has to be able to do his job, and we have their backs. That's the main thing.
And the other thing we look for is if there's like opportunists in the area too, that we have to fend off her, because they're there, for an opportunity to either take something or whatever, disrupt something, and then we know it's not good to be there, or if they're in bigger numbers or something like that, where we can't even control that.
And you are making an excellent point, and I will tell you that throughout the weekend, some of the things that I saw was people on occasion following around our crew and, pointing and looking, and it's the old, maybe something doesn't seem right. And so what I will say is I will alert the crew saying, just keep your eye on that guy or the girl, in this particular mask, just to be safe. Right. And that's part of the situation awareness that we talked about earlier. And, as it turned out, one of those people ran up to a photographer I was with on Saturday and pushed them for no reason. And that guy ran away. Fortunately, my photographer was fine. We reported it to the station. The guy ran off. Everything was all right because he was probably 90 pounds dripping wet. But it's all part of situational awareness. If someone looks, just keep eyes on them.
And one of the really important things, and I don't know if you guys touched on this before I came on, was the extra care that you have to take for the photographer. You talk about the reporters, right? We've got a microphone and we're listening in our earpiece, but we've got all of our peripheral vision, there for us. We can't see behind us, but we can see all around us. We can turn, we can spin around even. But that photographer, he's focused on the reporter with one eye closed, covered with a viewfinder. So they've got one eye and barely any field of view to see anything that's going on around them. So, one of the most important things that you have to do as a reporter is, you're focused on the viewer, right? You're looking into that lens, but you've got to keep an eye out for your photographer, who literally is almost completely blind to what's happening behind him and on at least one side of his face. I had an incident where my photographer was filming looting, and literally somebody came up behind him and just sucker punched him right on the side of the face because he couldn't see from that side. The mistake that was made was that we were on the wrong side of him because he was filming, right? We should have been on the side where he couldn't see so that we could be his eyes on that side. And we should have spanned out. We learned that obviously in that situation, but it's one of those things that it's easy to forget about how little the photographer can see in these situations because they're focused on that frame and making sure everything fits in it. And that is their field of view. So it's one of the things that we talk about as crews now is making sure that photographer, one, is safe. And also, if you do have to get out of there, I had a friend, Sam Winslade, who was with me in Ferguson, who was also in Seattle a couple of days ago with NBC News correspondent Jolene Kent when she was hit with that firework. And I noticed that when security grabbed the reporter, they took off running and everybody started running. And then I couldn't see where they went because I was seeing this through the field of Sam's camera. He was left way behind. So, the instinct is obviously to grab the person who's in front of the camera, but you can't forget the crew member who's also shooting. So that's one of the things that, I found was interesting that I've seen over the last couple of days.
And Usher, obviously, I appreciate you bringing that up. Both John Rizzo with IBW and myself, Razan Siddiqui with NABIT, represent just those very guys who we're talking about, the guys who not only have an obstruction of half their peripheral vision, but also have maybe $20,000 worth of gear that they are attractively marching around sometimes. So, John, kind of tell me some of the things that you've heard from some of your people about how proactive maybe the companies have been or anything that they need or have asked for regarding how to go about this. And then, just so you guys can start preparing, I'm going to talk with Usher as well about just the whole situation with both dealing with a pandemic and at the same time a protest and how that's kind of changed anything we've ever dealt with. So kind of we're reinventing what we're doing. John, let's start with what you're hearing from your guys.
Well, it's great segue because one of the suggestions that have come up from my stewards over at WGN on how to keep our people safer. And I know this stinks for photogs because, there's a love of the art and a lot of the cameras are larger. So they supposedly give you such a great image. But the one thing for security that they've been talking about is camouflage when they're within these crowds. And that means smaller cameras, more compact cameras, where you actually have the LCD screen rather than the viewfinder. So now you have your peripheral vision open back up. Smaller cameras or cell phones. That if you're going to do a walk and talk in the street, that you're going to blend into a crowd way better for this type of activity. And that way, if things escalate, it goes in your pocket. If you're doing a live broadcast, you're probably bringing what's called a Jujero unit or a backpack unit with you. And then if things go sideways in a heartbeat, you basically throw everything in your pocket. Your IDs and credentials are hidden unless you're near a police officer. You show them that and say, where can I go? How can I be protected immediately, so that you can separate yourself from the crowd once you find a police officer or proper security or that line that you can get on the other side of. So our folks are trying to figure out ways that they can basically camouflage themselves, because that seems to be the only protection. You're not camouflaged if you're wearing a helmet and gas mask and everything else. So if you can't get to your vehicle, if you can't get out of that crowd, what's the safest and easiest way to blend in until you can find that escape route? And that's having smaller gear, having the ability to go live with micro transmitters and things like that off your cell phone or whatever. So that seems to be the easiest thought of how to stay safe. It might not be the prettiest feed that you're going to send back or the clearest images, but you're going to you hopefully go home in one piece. So that's what we've been hearing as far as suggestions. And yes, there could be some resistance to that, but all in all, the desk will assign you to go wherever. It's the managers that are there, the news directors, who are completely sympathetic. We haven't dealt with discipline for members who have spoken up and said, hey, no way. In fact, they're very supportive. If you say no way, get your butt out of there. And that's been great. We've worked with the companies, obviously during the pandemic, to limit exposure. But this is a whole new animal that's requiring us to put ourselves right back in harm's way. And I don't, until the protests die down, or until the next protest, I don't know how we stay safe. Until this news cycle, relaxes itself a little bit, and we go on to shoot other things and stay safer. So.
Well, I think you bring an interesting point on, and this is again what I want to bring both of you guys and both my veteran reporters here to weigh in, both Usher and Jeremy. This is just a very different situation. We have gone through the whole procedure of dealing with protests before. John, you very aptly said how we sometimes camouflage, use the small cameras. I've seen the guys at Channel 2 have been very proactive with using the little, I forget what they're called, the GoPros on sticks, and just not being identified as mainstream media. But getting their images, getting the video across, and doing so in a safe manner. But here's where safety gets kind of a little bit questionable, because now we have big crowds, when just 2 weeks ago we were told to avoid interactions altogether. We were told, most of us who aren't essential workers, stay in your home, don't get in the middle of this. This is very different. Jeremy, Usher, tell me your takes on this.
It's listen, I'll go first. There's no good solution. There is the best, worst, a possible outcome that you're kind of looking for, and that is some sort of compromise as to social distancing, but at the same time trying to cover a story where that can't be done. And that means wearing as much PPE, or for instance, just kind of, a mask, and you got that on the entire time. And by the end of the day, I'll tell you what, you feel something miserable for all the nurses and healthcare workers who have to do that on a day-to-day basis when they've been going to work for years, who do that regularly because it's not comfortable and it's not fun. But, for instance, during some of the marches, myself and my photojournalist have tried as best as we could to cover appropriately, but perhaps be on the sidewalk, but perhaps maybe shoot from one street away. Now, the problem with that is you can't always do that. When you're following a march that's on the move, Lazo, like the one that you saw on Sunday, we couldn't do that. And so, we did our best that we possibly could, but that's a dangerous situation. The more and more we find out about COVID-19, kind of the most at-risk data that we are seeing is, and people keep bringing up the scientific study about the choir group, and how COVID-19 was spread through singing. And, I hate to say it, but a lot of the protests that we are seeing, people shouting, people screaming, and they are chanting. And is that much different from the singing that we've seen? The answer is no. So we are at risk. I'm doing my best not to get up real close to people who are shouting, who are screaming, as is the photojournalist. But, it's you can't have it both ways. You can't always be 6 feet away and covering a story like this. So, you do the best job you can in circumstances that are not ideal.
Well, what's impressive to me was if you looked at Minneapolis that first night of protests, the chopper shots, you could see the crowd was spread out. And I was really impressed by that. And I said, that's really incredible that they're that self-conscious and aware of the fact that they are protesting in the midst of a pandemic, that they kept social distancing. And I said, that will not last. And clearly it did not last. And it's so easy. I mean, it happens to me now, even when I'm doing a regular interview. I mean, we have what we call zero touch interviews that we do, where we set up, boom arms and a microphone, and the person literally walks into frame and they're 10 feet away from you, and you literally don't get within, spitting distance of them, let alone breathing distance of them. So, but it's so easy to forget because we've been in isolation for months. We've been restricted in our movements. It's so easy to get out of the mentality that we're in the midst of a pandemic and we're now covering a protest. And when you're in that mindset, it may be the end of the night and you go, oh my gosh, I was literally within inches of people's faces all around me. And that is potentially explosive when it comes to what we've been talking about for months about social distancing. Everything that we've been talking about and doing for 2-3 months goes out the window, essentially, when you have thousands of people congregating in such close quarters. And we're already seeing the numbers in the tens of thousands of new cases of COVID-19. And, over the next couple of weeks, unfortunately, scientifically, it stands to reason that we're going to see even more explosive numbers when it comes to people who have been out at these protests, who have been in close contact with people they don't know. I mean, how do you contact trace a protest? You can't, essentially. And so that's one of the reasons I said, I was thinking, I'm like, what, maybe it makes sense. I know we talk about blending in and all that kind of thing, but the only surefire way to stay safe is just wear a gas mask the whole time you're out, essentially, and protect your eyes and your nose and your mouth. But again, you talk about this from prior years, and anybody that's wearing a helmet in some of these situations, sometimes the feedback, there's backlash for that, saying you're hyping the situation. You're wearing a helmet or a gas mask when there's really no need to do that on television. You can see people around you are not doing that. But there are other safety considerations that come into play because of COVID-19. And I'll be honest, I don't mind if people think, okay, he's being silly wearing that getup while covering a peaceful protest. But it's not just the peaceful protest that's a threat. It's the virus as well. And so we might have to rethink sort of that sense of feeling embarrassed about how much we're portraying on air, about how serious the situation is, because you do have to protect yourself and your family and anybody else that you're in close contact with outside of that protest, because you're bringing that home.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, the Society of Professional Journalists sent out an email probably about 30 minutes to an hour ago saying, hey, we're aware of the increased number of attacks on journalists as all this is going on. So you have layers upon layers of concern, whether you're talking about just general danger, health danger, and then journalists and photojournalists being targeted.
And one other thing that's different about this that wasn't there in Ferguson 6 years ago is, for the last 5 years, this mantra of fake news has permeated society. And Lazo, you know it. I mean, we've experienced it outside of protests. People yelling fake news at us when we're in a live truck for NBC, or telling me, I've been told to go home back to my country. I was born in Skokie, so I don't know where to go. But the point is that there has been a ratcheting up of animosity towards journalists over the last few years, and that is playing and feeding into this as well. I mean, some of the things that we are seeing on the streets here. There was an Australian crew just the other day where you saw, a police officer in riot gear. This photographer is literally got his camera like this, and the police officer, in the heat of the moment, I don't know what preceded this, but didn't seem any reason for him to be shoving that cameraman the way he did, threw his shield into his chest and then punched his camera in the lens. that's unheard of. We've never seen that kind of danger coming from, the police, in addition to the protesters. And, my daughter just brought something down for me, because I don't think a lot of people have an idea of what some of this, these tactics look like. For example, this, if you can see it, I'm gonna hold it up.
Yeah.
That is a wooden pellet. This is something that was being fired at crowds, back in Ferguson, and that causes a huge welt, a bruise. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to sting pretty bad. The other thing that we came into contact with a lot of times was this.
Usher, it looks like we may have.
Okay, that is a CS gas canister, right? You can see it right there. Well, that's still. And that's the end of it. The gas comes out like this, right? It's probably got some CS still in there that I'm not going to taste. But that, as a projectile, if that hits you in the head, it's in the eye, that's dangerous. You see some of the things that are going on right now, even the clearing of the protesters outside the White House the other day, and they were firing at incredibly close range. There's that picture going around about the one protester who took a canister to the eye. These things are incredibly dangerous. This is heavy duty. And again, one of the things that always used to concern me when you're covering a protest is never to have your back to the police, because you don't know the projectiles. I mean, you get water bottles and rocks and bricks and things like that coming from the other side. You can get some of this stuff fired at, a high velocity. You take that to the back of the head and it's lights out. So again, these are very tense situations, and you got to take all of those things into consideration, because, again, you're under fire from all sides sometimes.
And show of hands for everyone listening right now. How many people have taken a lungful of tear gas or similar type of deterrent?
Okay, right. You're the lucky one.
One thing you don't realize is when you get tear gassed and you go back to your hotel room and you take a shower, and even if it's on your body, it turns into steam and hits you again. So you get tear gas yourself. So you got to be real careful about that kind of thing.
And it sticks to your clothes as well.
Yes.
So, right to the dry cleaner.
Yeah.
Not fun, folks.
One of the things I'm going to take a little opportunity to kind of self-promote what we're doing here. You talked about the whole mentality of fake news, and journalists are out there with an agenda. And as a matter of fact, that was my whole initiative in kind of starting this. Now you probably can't see what I have, the Media Essential Workers, because I wanted to chronicle back when the pandemic started, what it was that we were as journalists doing, not going out there with an agenda, but leaving our families, leaving our loved ones to go out there and perform a public service, kind of tell our story. And it was very much different for us, because as journalists were, for the most part, social beasts, but having been socially distanced, told you couldn't be with your reporter, couldn't be with fellow photographers, I found this was probably the best way for us to keep in contact, to be able to do it via online and be able to vent. So that was one of the things that I did to kind of at least get our message out there. But Usher, I mean, I absolutely agree with what you were saying, is that's just another tactic that we are kind of having to deal with or address. And I'm going to bring both Barbara and Bob Lazo in on this, because being law enforcement yourself, in a previous life, maybe you could tell us how we can, especially in protest situations like this, develop that rapport and relationship with the law enforcement there, to make sure that we're not getting on the wrong side of things in terms of coverage, in terms of being neutral, but still respectful enough where we're both able to do our jobs.
Well, being from this vantage point right now, we respect what you're doing, and getting the word out there, getting the pictures, performing a valuable service to the public is really something, and it should be appreciated. And as far as police go, I mean, everything's so supercharged right now. The protests, the police, everybody is just on edge, and you just can't predict what's going to happen on any side. So like I recommended before, staying on the fringe, but also going, if you get an opportunity, not so much in this situation because you might not have that opportunity, but introducing yourself, letting them know, and asking them, deferring to their authority and their, it always feels good to the police officer that you're deferring to them. You know, what can I do here? You know, there was a time when I remember we used to have a place for the press, and now that's, you know, that's out the window. It's been a while since that happened, but yeah. Bob has anything to add to that?
It's always good to let officers in the area know that you're there, and just give them a heads up. We're going to be filming here. Let us know if this is okay for us. If not, we'll move to the area that you want us to. But like my wife said, always give the police officer who's on site, let him know, give him the heads up. This way, hey, okay, if you do need help, he's going to come and help you too. That's the main thing. You want as much help as you can in case something does go down fast. That's a good idea. Make the officers aware that you're there. That's it. That's what I recommend.
So for security perspective and also the union perspective, we kind of touched on situational awareness, trying to blend in, opening up some line of communication between press and authorities out on the scene. Any other tips that you might give in terms of making sure that we are safe in these very volatile situations?
Yeah, I would say just, you know, like you were saying, like going in with the crowd and camouflaging, but you're also endangering yourself in some ways as well. Like if you're inside the crowd, because I would recommend staying outside the crowd and not moving with the crowd, because you don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes it involves pushing and shoving, and emotions are running high, and just well, I wear a mask when I go outside. It's probably hard for you to do that and talk or whatever, or be effective in describing a situation, but if you can, I mean, I would recommend that. And just knowing when it's not a good situation. You have brought that up, Jeremy, a couple times about being able to, and you have the benefit of having 3 people. Yes. And I think that's always a good combination, where you have someone watching, you have someone doing whatever, like you're all 3 not doing the same thing. And therefore you can, you could see what someone could always be like on point, seeing what's going on and knowing when to get out. And just, the major thing is that you stay safe as well. For all of us, any job is that it comes down to being safe in that and being able to go home at the end of the day.
And again, that's what the unions are here for. That's why, after hearing from what a lot of our members were saying, I wanted to get John in on this conversation and talk about what we can do. And I know AFTRA is engaged in this as well. John, I know you got to run here, but kind of, is there any parting thought that you kind of want to leave us with? Anything you want to share before you head on out?
It's I'm learning a lot here from everybody's perspective, and it's helpful for me to keep our folks safe. Everybody, please stay safe. I know it's hard, it's evolving. The good news is that the temperature is coming down. Protests are becoming more peaceful. Looters don't respect a 6-foot social distancing, regardless of the dots on the floor. They're going to climb over each other like ants on a hill to get gym shoes or stuff from the beauty salon or whatever you're witnessing them, throw something through a window, and then they go right back in the crowd, and then they breathe on you. So, it's going to be tough. Bathe with Purell if you have to. We'll probably see an uptick in the state from these protests. That I would not doubt. I mean, we saw the uptick when it came to voting in Wisconsin and things like that. So I would have no doubt that in these states where there are these, very close-knit protests, you're going to see an uptick. And it's hard for our reporters, our photogs, our producers to stay out of that. Unfortunately, staying on the fringe of those crowds is near impossible, because all it takes is one shift and you're engulfed. You were going one way and you were at the back of the crowd, and then they turn a corner and surround you before you know it. Stay safe, stay camouflaged as much as you can. If the hairs in the back of your neck go up, you go backwards. Get out of there as fast as possible. and hopefully everybody comes home at the end of the day to their families. And you know, like Raza said, we're here on a union side to protect our people, and you guys have SAG-AFTRA, and they should be protecting you as well. And so far, everyone's doing a good job. And you know, as things are changing, news is changing, and might be a good thing, might be a bad thing when we come out of this. But bottom line is, it's going to evolve, and hopefully, thanks to Raza, we're going to learn some stuff and stay on top of this as we go with these exchange of ideas, and it's very, very helpful. So thank you, Raza.
Thank you so much, John, for participating in this. I know you were very proactive in talking with me as we were dealing with unemployment for our sports freelancers when COVID first started and games were put on hold. And I think it's very important for us to continue this dialogue between not only both your union and ours, but also after us. So we look forward to continuing that. Thank you for joining us today, John. I'm going to punch you out here. And just wanted to ask Usher, Jeremy, any other questions you have for our law enforcement experts while we have them here? Anything we need to discuss that I may have forgotten to discuss? You guys are the professionals when it comes to asking questions and soliciting answers. So I'm going to defer to both of you.
You know, one of the things that I love to be able to do is just kind of go over a checklist, so to speak. And I think for the most part, the things that I will add to my arsenal will be, how can I be more on the periphery? I think that was a very good suggestion. It's not always practical, but I think that that's something to consider. Trying to blend in more. I have seen other news crews take off their little cube on the stick mic, and maybe that might make us less of a target going forward. So those are maybe some discussions that I could have with my crew going out to see if that might make everyone else feel a little comfortable. Maybe we do have some smaller cameras that still keep the quality overall pretty high. And particularly when covering some of the protests, we're going to do a lot of walking. That's going to save the photographers back pretty well. So, you know, that's something that we will also discuss. So there's some things to consider.
And, you know, again, we all know that, like first responders, that's what we do. We run towards the location, the event, the incident that everybody's running away from, right? So we have to relearn some of our thinking when it comes to the way that these protests are unfolding. And it's not always the best practice for us to run right into the epicenter of these protests and get that amazing shot of what's happening out there. Because, you know, there are other ways to tell this story. We have helicopters in the air. You know, you can get these shots from further away effectively. I've seen shots that are from buildings shooting down above the crowd. Just in Washington, D.C., they did that the other day. And you really got a sense of what was happening without being sort of crowded in amidst, you know, the sea of people. And I think we just have to mentally start thinking about that this is not just about getting those images out and telling you what's happening right at the center of it, but doing it at a safe distance as much as possible, again, as we are all contending with a global pandemic. I mean, that has to be front and center. You know, anybody in that crowd could be carrying, and any one of those people could infect thousands and thousands of people, and you included. So again, you know, while we got to take our reporter journalist hats off a little bit and start thinking a little bit more like like public health officials about how would public health officials recommend we cover this event. And, you know, because there's danger coming from all sides, right? You know, you've got danger from in some cases from the law enforcement that has to make sure that, you know, life and property is safe, and you may get caught up in that situation. And you have protesters, and amidst those protesters, you have bad actors who have more nefarious purposes afoot, who really want to agitate the situation. And then you've got the germs and the viruses floating around. So, you know, there's a lot more danger out there, and so we have to rethink, you know, that sort of visceral notion that we need to run towards it. You know, no, we have to stop, assess, look, and find out how to tell that story in the safest way possible.
I think that was well said. Anything you'd like to add, Bob, Barbara, about your take on these things?
your journalists seem very astute, and they know what's going on. And like I said, we appreciate them. And obviously, they're very aware of their circumstances, and just continue to be safe. And you guys seem like you have a good feel for what's going on, and it's a great thing. More than anything, the awareness is what's going to save you in the long run.
And I think just this communication, just the ability for us all to talk and be able to get our questions answered by the people that we trust to come out with us. I know they're referred to as fixers when they're overseas. You're referred to as friends over here. I'm sure you raised your hand like a kid in a classroom. So
yeah, just one last thing that I think is so important. And, if you feel unsafe, do not hesitate to tell your management. They have to listen to you. If you don't feel like you're getting the kind of response that you should be getting from management about your safety and your concerns, go higher. Talk to your union representatives. Talk to your colleagues. Talk to whoever you need to, because in the end, you are responsible for your safety. And if you're not feeling like you're getting that support, hopefully you are. But if you don't feel like you're getting that support, or you're getting pushback from management, or you're getting pushback from the editors who want you to be in the mix of things, you got to push back and make sure that you are safe, and do that without fear.
well said. Can't add anything to that. Thank you, Usher Qureshi, Bob Lazo, Barbara, Jeremy, John Rizzo, who was with us earlier, for having this conversation, for getting the word out, to be able to talk not only amongst ourselves, but to our members who've been kind of watching this and our friends who have been watching this. Let's keep the dialogue going. And thank you guys all for joining me today.
Thank you for
Okay.
having
Thank
us.
you. Stay safe, everyone.
Be safe.
Okay.
Take care.
Yeah, be safe.
Yeah, be safe.